I will. I wasn't in Maryland during Agnes, but here's NLE. You want to put NLE up? I'll go ahead. I was living in Pittsburgh, but the week before Agnes, I took a vacation to Maryland and D.C., and I actually passed through Ellicott City. And my experience of Agnes was the following week. I was having lunch with a friend in the restaurant at the top of the U.S. Steel building in Pittsburgh, and we were watching houses floating by on the Allegheny River down below. Anyway, Howard Dillow was a fireman on a Navy destroyer escort in World War II. He rode out the destructive Pacific Typhoon of September 1944. But his best sea story comes from one night on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in Maryland. We're missing the Titanic things on the TV tonight, so this is your sea story. Howard's account of his Agnes experience was told to Ernest F. Imhoff. It was published in the Liberty Log, the magazine of the still operating World War II Liberty ship SS John W. Brown of Baltimore, and has been published in various forms elsewhere. And that's how I got involved in this, because it's going to be published again in the B&O Historical Society magazine, The Sentinel. And I got involved doing some field work, and I happened to mention it to Charles, and he invited me to come here. Let me share with you Howard Dillow's account of what he calls the night on the caboose. You saw the picture of the locomotive, and this is sort of a continuation of that. I was 17 when I joined the Navy in June 1944. For 15 months, we went all over the Pacific with troop ships and LSTs. I left the Navy in 1949. For a while, I drove a concrete truck in Anne Arundel County, got laid off, and went to the Baltimore, Ohio in 1950. Stayed there for 37 years. I loved the railroad. My trains went from the Howard Street Tunnel in Baltimore, past Camden Yards, to Brunswick, Maryland, to Virginia, and from Philadelphia to Cumberland, Maryland. Tropical Storm Agnes hit Maryland in June 1972. It became one of the biggest natural disasters in Howard County history. It had rained for a week. All the rivers were rising. The trains kept running, but we wondered how long. On the night of June 21st, we were taking an empty 135-car coal hopper train from Curtis Bay to Brunswick. The train was going back to the coal mines in West Virginia. I was the flagman in the caboose. They don't have that job anymore. It's all computers and electronics and machines now. They don't have cabooses anymore. We left Curtis Bay at 11 o'clock that night. I'd been on this run hundreds of times. It's all uphill to Mount Airy. We were going 15 miles an hour or slower. At that pace, it's about 8 hours to Brunswick. The conductor, Carl Grosch, had overall responsibility for the train. The engineer was Howard Winter. He and the brakeman, whose name I don't recall, were up front. The conductor and I were in the caboose. It's been raining all day, and now it's pouring all night. The ground is saturated, wet where it usually isn't wet. We came through Halethorpe, just west of Baltimore City. We got a radio message to stop up ahead at the Davis siding in Woodstock. We do that. We're right parallel to the Patapsco River. The river is flooding pretty good, water moving fast. I look down. A side stream feeding the Patapsco, that's the Davis branch, is rising in a culvert underneath our train. The culvert is called Bridge 22 on the railroad. The diesel engine has come to a stop near the Woodstock Road grade crossing. Our caboose is near the other end of the siding. We're on tracks forming a big D. The first visual there, I'll show you the track arrangement. We get orders to unhook the engine from the 135 cars and leave them in the siding, return the engine by the connecting tracks to the caboose, hook up the caboose, and get back to Baltimore. Anyway, those are the orders. It's too late. In minutes, the mud and water trap us all. The engine is higher than the caboose, but it can't go forward because of a mudslide up ahead of it. And he didn't know about Sykesville at that point. Carl and I were still in the caboose. It's 10 tons, but we're getting nervous. The river had come up in our rear. Water is slapping the caboose so fast it's sending spray over the top. Water's coming under our door. I open it, and just like that, we're in 3 feet of water. We gotta get out, but we can't walk away. Too late again. We climb up on the running board on top of the roof. It's 15 feet above the rails, but the water's starting to cover the caboose, and the spray is splashing us. The river is all around us going 2 different ways. It's rising slowly and going downhill fast. We each have our grip with us, complete set of clothes and a plastic bag. It's 1 a.m. now and raining real hard. We see trees and branches go by fast. Then come the snakes. The snakes are hanging all over the roots and branches. They're swimming in the water everywhere. Indiana Jones would have loved it. You know, tree roots in the ground make spaces where the snakes like to go. Water flushes them out. Snakes are everywhere mixed in with the branches. We're scared. The snakes just kept coming with the water. We're up there for hours. Rain never stops. Water came 12 feet up the side of the caboose, 2 feet from the top where we were, closer, closer. Later they said the Patapsco got 44 feet over normal. I've ridden storms out, but nothing like that. God, I was scared. We knew the engineer knew we were there and was getting help. We're gonna die, Carl kept saying. We're gonna die. He said the same thing over and over. We're gonna die. I was scared, and I said to him, shut up. If you don't shut up, I'm gonna throw you off and you are gonna die. I could swim. I was Navy, but you couldn't have swum in that stuff. Deep, fast water, very fast. We were frozen, wearing rain gear, but we were as wet inside as out. We just waited and waited, hour after hour, up there all night, wondering when's help coming. Finally, after 6 a.m., some firefighters came near us. West Friendship Volunteer Fire Department. They hollered to us, we're going to throw you a line. They were too far away. One firefighter tied a rope around his waist and swam 50 feet, but couldn't make it. They pulled him back to safety. We waited some more. Water is almost over the top now. Finally, we heard a helicopter. I light a flare and wave. The engineer had run for help, pounded on doors, found someone who took him to a state trooper. Pilots had many calls that night. This pilot came in and negotiated under and around branches of trees still standing. I thought he'd crash. He hovers right over us. Of course, I'm soaking wet. I throw my grip in the helicopter and grab his handrail. Wow, shock, ball of fire, static electricity. If you've ever seen Hunt for Red October, you know what that's like with helicopters. Felt like I was grabbing 10 spark plugs. Helicopter backs away and comes back. This time I lunge forward, lunge towards something else, and they grab me from the helicopter and pull me in. Then they get Carl inside. We're off the train, thank God. They take us to the National Guard Armory in Ellicott City. Sergeant came out and said, how about a cup of coffee? I could have hugged him, but I didn't. I wanted that coffee fast and it was good. I took a shower, changed clothes, and kept my wet clothes on. They gave us a big breakfast. Guys kidded me afterward and said I was the state's only helicopter flagman. The engineer said, I thought you guys were goners. I never saw anything like that in the entire Pacific Ocean and never went to see another flood. The worst thing was not knowing if we're going to get off the roof. A little bit longer, and it would have been too late. Well, the B&O train sat up there at the Davis siding a whole year. Tracks and railroad ties all over it washed out. I worked another almost 16 years and retired in 1987. It was a good job. I loved railroad work. Now I love the Brown. The rest of the story, Howard's conductor, Carl Grosch, became a senior conductor on the railroad and moved up to passenger service on the MARC trains between Baltimore and Washington. He was an avid rail fan, and his daily passengers apparently adored him. I didn't really know him, but I did meet him in October of 1985. He retired the next month and sadly died in 1989. Meanwhile, I have not met Howard Dillow either, but I talked to him on the phone just a couple weeks ago. He lives in Glen Burnie, is 84 years old, and is still a fireman water tender on the John W. Brown. I'll show a couple slides. Number one. All right, this is the track chart. This is schematic, but the B&O is headed west this way. Here's Woodstock Road, and the D he was talking about, this is the Davis siding. And you see two tracks here, single track going through two tunnels, and then a single track again. So the engine was stopped about here, and that's Bridge 22, which is the Davis branch of the Patapsco, and the caboose, which you'll see in a minute, was about here. And like he said, the train was there for about a year. They were going to abandon the railroad, but they finally connected the tracks and removed it. There was probably some anomaly in the water levels there because you see the river comes around the bend, so that was probably constricting a little bit, and then the tunnels, the water got backed up because it couldn't flow across that peninsula there. So it was probably a little higher than it would have been if it hadn't been if it had been a straight track. Okay, next slide. This picture was taken by Keith Weller, who's if you have the 12 by 15 flood book, it's got a lot of pictures of the flood in there. And I had seen this picture before. It was published in the Old Times newspaper, and I thought this picture was in the flood book, but it isn't, at least not in the one I have. Maybe they did a second edition. The ladies from the Howard County Historical Society let me look through their Agnes files, And I found this clipping from the Times newspaper. Here's the Davis branch, here's the Patapsco. This was obviously taken a few days later. Keith Weller told me it was his first job and he'd only been working for the newspaper a few months. And he took this from an open cockpit plane. Nobody seems to have prints of this, but this is a scan of a photocopy from the clipping from the paper. The caboose is right here. So here's the Davis branch, here's the caboose. That's what Howard and Carl were standing on top of. And the final slide, went down there to the park in January, a nice brisk January morning. This is the Davis branch, this is Bridge 22. Picture was taken from the Baltimore County side. There's a trailhead leading in from Davis Avenue. And this is an eastbound train. The caboose was about here. And a lot of trees there. It's hard to take pictures of it. But anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Charles asked me to speak to you. I thought, what will I say? There is so much that you truly don't know where to start. So I will just say that I was born in Catonsville, but I now live on this side of the tracks. In 1972, we were getting ready for a bicentennial celebration in Ellicott City. It rained for almost 2 weeks. On the evening news, we learned that Ellicott City was near flood stage. They flashed a picture of the press room at the Times newspaper, showing that the presses had stopped, and there was the front cover of our bicentennial journal for the world to see. The next day we went to work and saw the aftermath of the destruction. Another flood had devastated our historic town. We all went to work, and in 2 weeks we were ready for another celebration of history. And that's about all I have. I have bicentennial journals and heritages of the flood. And of course, this is what the article I was saying showed on the presses, the next for the whole world to see. Charles Carroll laying the cornerstone for the railroad. So I do have this here if anybody would like to see, if there's any questions. Charles said I don't have to say much.
They don't have a historical society.
No, I really don't.
Nobody seems to know.
Nope, I really don't. I'm sorry. I would think that's where they would have put them in the Historical Society. How about the library? The public library, Howard County Library.
I don't think they have a photo.
Really? Oh. Okay. Well, I really don't know. I'm sorry. But we have lots of photographs in the Bicentennial Journal and everything.
How long was your store shut down?
My store was not shut down in one day because it didn't get that far. It was about halfway up Main Street. Very much like you just saw a few weeks ago. So everybody on the other side of the street now had it pretty bad because the water came up from they call it the Tiber, but it's really the Ellicott branch. Somewhere along the line it got Tiber, I don't know why. But the Ellicott branch rose, went into all the shops on the other side of the street from me, into their basements. We have no basement. So we really escaped it pretty well. It was pretty bad. Really bad. Any other? Well, everybody brought every child they had, and everybody brought everything they had, and worked very hard. I would say that we were back ready for the bicentennial, which was only a couple weeks off. The bicentennial celebration, and you would never have thought that we could, get it all straight, but we did. 2 weeks later, I think it was, maybe 2.5 weeks later, we had the bicentennial celebration, and you couldn't see anything of what had happened. It was like a miracle. It's amazing what people will do when they all get together and work together for some special thing like 200 years. Thank you very much.